The rain never seemed to stop in the city that winter. The streets were slick with mud and oil, and the air reeked of gasoline and damp concrete. Clara Williams clutched her thin coat tighter as she shuffled down the crowded street, her stomach aching with hunger. Every bakery she passed taunted her with warm bread in the window, but she had no money left, not a cent. Except for the necklace. Her fingers slipped into her pocket, brushing against the small velvet pouch she had carried for as long as she could remember. Inside was the delicate gold necklace with a sapphire pendant. It had been her mother's most treasured possession. Clara could still hear her mother's voice, weak but insistent during her last days. "Clara, promise me you'll keep this safe. It's worth more than gold. It carries a story you'll understand one day." Clara had promised, but promises didn't fill empty stomachs. Now, desperate and alone after her mother's death, she stood in front of a pawn shop. The window was foggy, filled with watches and tarnished rings. She hesitated, heart pounding. Selling it felt like betraying her mother. But her stomach twisted sharply, and she imagined a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, maybe even some fruit. Food meant survival. She took a breath, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The shop smelled of dust and metal. Behind the counter sat a heavy-set man with a thinning hairline, flipping through a newspaper. He looked up lazily. "Yeah." Clara's voice shook as she pulled the pouch from her pocket and set the necklace on the counter. I'd like to sell this." The man raised his brows, picked it up, and examined it under the light. The sapphire glimmered faintly. "Where'd you get this?" he asked gruffly. "It was my mother's," Clara murmured, her throat tight. He hummed, weighing it in his palm. Finally, he said, $100. Clara blinked. Surely it was worth more. But she had no energy to argue. Hunger was louder than pride. "I'll take it," she whispered. He slid the bills across the counter, and Clara snatched them up, feeling both relieved and hollow as she stepped back into the rain, leaving behind the last piece of her mother. Across town, in the highest office of a glass skyscraper, Alexander Grant sat behind a polished mahogany desk. The CEO of Grant Enterprises, he was a man both respected and feared. His tailored suit, silver hair, and stern eyes made him look untouchable. But beneath the armor of success, his heart carried a wound that never healed. 3 years ago, his daughter Emily had vanished. 16 years old, bright and full of life, she had disappeared without explanation. Despite searches, investigations, and sleepless nights, no trace had ever been found. Eventually, the police stopped calling, friends stopped asking, and the world moved on. But Alexander hadn't. Every night, he stared at her photo, clinging to the memory of her laughter. That evening, as he worked late, his assistant entered with a small box. "Sir, one of our pawn shop branches processed this today. The manager thought you'd want to see it before it was logged." Alexander barely looked up, until he opened the box and saw the necklace. His heart stopped. The gold chain, the sapphire pendant, it was impossible to mistake. He had given this very necklace to Emily on her 16th birthday, engraved with tiny words inside the clasp, "Forever my little girl." His hands trembled, his throat closed. "Where did this come from?" he demanded. "East Main shop. A young woman sold it. About 19 or 20, thin, poorly dressed. We didn't get her name." Alexander stood so abruptly that his chair scraped the floor. His pulse thundered in his ears. "Find her," he ordered. The next morning, Clara sat in a small cafe, savoring the simple breakfast she had bought: bread, tea, and a small apple. She tried to stretch it, eating slowly, because she didn't know when she'd next be able to afford food. She didn't notice the tall man until his shadow fell across her table. Clara Williams. She looked up, startled. The man was broad-shouldered, dressed in an immaculate suit, his expression intense. "Yes," she said cautiously. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat. "I'm Alexander Grant," he said. The name meant nothing to Clara, though nearly everyone in the city knew it. Before she could respond, he placed something on the table. Her heart lurched. The necklace. Clara's lips parted, her throat dry. How did you?" "This," Alexander said, his voice low and steady, "belonged to my daughter." Clara stared at him, words tangled in her mouth. "That's not possible. It was my mother's. She gave it to me before she died." His eyes searched hers. "Your mother's name?" "Margaret Williams." Alexander inhaled sharply. He remembered Margaret, his late wife's best friend years ago. They had lost touch, but the name stirred old memories. "What year were you born, Clara?" 2004. Alexander's breath caught. The same year Emily had been born. He reached into his wallet with shaking hands and slid a photograph across the table, a smiling girl with bright eyes. Clara's chest constricted. She knew that face. She came to our house once, Clara whispered. My mother told me her name was Emily. Alexander's throat tightened. His eyes burned. Emily was my daughter, he said hoarsely. If she gave this necklace to your mother, then you and I, his voice faltered. Clara, you might be my daughter too. The world tilted. Clara's pulse roared in her ears. No, she whispered. That can't be true. My mother said my father died before I was born. But fragments of memory stirred. Her mother's secrecy, the nights she cried when she thought Clara was asleep, the way she clutched the necklace as though it was more than jewelry. Alexander's voice softened, trembling with something he rarely showed, vulnerability. Clara, I lost one daughter. I can't lose another. If there's even a chance, let me prove it. A DNA test. Answers. Tears stung Clara's eyes. Her whole life she had felt invisible, forgotten by the world. Now this powerful man sat before her, speaking words she had longed to hear. You matter. You belong. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know who I am anymore. Alexander reached across the table, his hand trembling as it touched hers. You're my daughter. I can feel it, and I will not let you suffer alone any longer. For the first time in years, Clara felt the weight of loneliness begin to lift. Weeks later, the DNA test confirmed what neither dared to hope. Clara was Alexander's daughter. Margaret, out of fear of Alexander's ruthless reputation, had kept the truth from him. She had raised Clara alone, believing it was safer that way. Now, Clara's life transformed. No longer starving, no longer scraping for survival, she lived under the roof of a father who was both a stranger and a guardian. It wasn't easy. Wealth and comfort didn't erase years of hardship, but slowly, she began to trust that she was no longer alone. Every night, Clara wore the sapphire necklace again. It had led her to the truth. It had reunited a broken family. Sometimes she still dreamed of Emily, her sister she never truly knew, whose absence lingered like a shadow. But she carried her memory, too, as if Emily herself had guided the necklace into her hands, ensuring she wouldn't be forgotten. And Alexander, hardened CEO and grieving father, looked at Clara with quiet determination. He couldn't change the past. He couldn't bring Emily back. But he could cherish the daughter he had found again, and never let her go. Because once, a poor girl had sold an old necklace for food. And in doing so, she had found her family. The rain fell harder than usual that night, sheets of water pelting the broken sidewalks and bouncing off the roofs of rusting cars. Clara Williams pulled her thin coat tighter as she hurried down East Main, her shoes squelching with every step. The hunger twisting in her stomach had become unbearable, sharp, gnawing pains that made her feel dizzy. For 2 days she had eaten nothing but the crusts of bread left over from her landlord's trash. And now even that was gone. She stopped under a flickering streetlight, her hands trembling as she pulled a small velvet pouch from her pocket. Inside was her most treasured possession, a delicate gold necklace with a sapphire pendant. Her mother had worn it until the day she died. Clara had often asked about it when she was younger. Her mother would only smile sadly and say, "It was a gift, Clara. From someone who once meant everything to me." There were times Clara had wanted to sell it. Many, in fact, but each time, her mother's weak voice echoed in her memory, "This necklace carries a story you'll one day understand. Don't let it go easily." But now, standing on a cold and hungry night, Clara had no choice. Survival mattered more than sentiment. She pushed open the door of a pawn shop. The stale smell of metal and damp carpet filled her nostrils. Behind the counter sat a heavy-set man with a balding head, flipping lazily through a newspaper. Clara's voice cracked as she spoke. I'd like to sell this." The man looked up and raised an eyebrow as she placed the necklace on the counter. He picked it up, squinted under the harsh light, and turned it over in his fingers. "Where'd you get this?" he asked gruffly. "It was my mother's," Clara murmured. The man frowned, weighed it in his hand, and said flatly, $100. Clara's heart sank. She had always suspected it was worth far more, but hunger left no room for bargaining. "I'll take it," she whispered. The man shoved the bills across the counter. Clara grabbed them and hurried out into the rain. She didn't dare look back at the necklace she had left behind. That same evening, high above the city in a gleaming skyscraper, Alexander Grant sat in his office, staring blankly at a stack of reports. The CEO of Grant Enterprises was a man known for discipline and precision, but tonight his thoughts drifted elsewhere. To Emily. His daughter had been 16 when she vanished 3 years ago. The police had searched, reporters had swarmed, and private investigators had been hired, but she was never found. Some whispered she had run away. Others suspected worse. Alexander never believed she had left willingly. Emily had been the light of his life, his only child after his wife's death. Losing her had broken something inside him that no success, no money, no empire could repair. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. His assistant entered, carrying a small box. "Sir, this came through one of our pawn divisions today. The manager thought you'd want to see it." Alexander barely looked up, until the lid was lifted, and the necklace glinted under the light. His breath caught, his hand trembled as he picked it up. The gold, the sapphire, the engraving inside the clasp, "Forever my little girl." Memories stabbed through him, Emily's laughter on her 16th birthday when he fastened it around her neck. This was her necklace. Where? His voice was hoarse. "The East Main shop, sir." A young woman sold it, thin, around 20. No name given. Alexander's jaw tightened. His chest burned. If this girl had Emily's necklace, then she knew something. He rose abruptly from his chair. "Find her," he ordered. Part 2 The Daughter's Shadow. The next morning, Clara sat in a corner booth of a shabby cafe, carefully stretching her breakfast, a crusty roll, a small apple, and a cup of lukewarm tea. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, because she didn't know when she would eat again. She didn't notice the man who entered until his shadow fell across her table. Clara Williams. Her head snapped up. A tall man stood before her, silver hair, sharp eyes, and a commanding presence in a tailored suit. "Yes," she said cautiously. "I'm Alexander Grant." The name meant nothing to Clara. Without another word, he pulled something from his pocket and placed it on the table. Clara's heart lurched. The necklace. Her lips parted. How did you?" "This belonged to my daughter," Alexander said quietly. His gaze was piercing, almost desperate. "Where did you get it?" Clara's hands trembled. She wanted to lie, to say she'd found it. But the intensity of his stare crushed her resolve. "It was my mother's," she whispered. "She gave it to me before she died." Alexander's expression shifted. "Your mother's name?" "Margaret Williams." He froze. He remembered Margaret, his wife's best friend, years ago, before tragedy and distance had severed ties. "Clara, what year were you born?" 2004, she said slowly. Alexander pulled a photograph from his wallet, his hands shaking. He slid it across the table. A girl smiled from the picture, bright eyes, long hair. "Do you know this face?" he asked. Clara gasped. She remembered her. "She came to our house once," Clara whispered. "My mother called her Emily. She said Emily was my sister." The cafe seemed to dissolve around them. Alexander's throat tightened. "Emily was my daughter. If Margaret had the necklace, if she brought Emily to see you," his voice cracked. "Then you must be mine too." Clara shook her head, tears springing to her eyes. "No, my mother said my father died before I was born." But fragments of memory swirled. Her mother crying at night, clutching the necklace, speaking words Clara didn't understand. Alexander's voice softened, breaking past his usually cold exterior. "Clara, I've lost one daughter. I cannot lose another. Let me prove it. A DNA test, answers, whatever it takes." Her chest tightened. All her life, she had felt invisible, unwanted, forgotten. Now this powerful man looked at her as though she was the most important person in the world. I don't know," she whispered. But when his hand reached across the table and covered hers, trembling, she didn't pull away. Weeks later, the truth came. The DNA test confirmed it. Clara was Alexander's daughter. Margaret had hidden the truth to protect her, fearing Alexander's world of ruthless business and power. Clara's life shifted overnight. She moved from hunger and obscurity into a world of wealth and comfort, but the transition was not easy. The scars of poverty remained, and grief for her mother, and for the sister she never knew, still weighed heavily. But she was not alone anymore. Every night she wore the sapphire necklace once more. It had been the key to her past, the bridge to her father. Sometimes she imagined Emily's hand guiding it to her, ensuring she would be found. And Alexander, hardened CEO, softened in ways no one had thought possible. He had lost one daughter but found another. He vowed never again to let family slip through his fingers. Because once, a poor girl had sold an old necklace for food. And in doing so, she had found her father.